Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody can hear us. My name is Lindy von Maltitz. I'm a senior lecturer at the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of the Free State. I'm also the manager of a new initiative named LEAF. It stands for the Land, Enterprise and Agricultural Futures Initiative. It is interdisciplinary, so that means different departments and faculties will work together, and we are dedicated to addressing urgent challenges in agriculture with a mission to enhance the competitiveness of our agricultural supply chains through innovation and cost reduction. For this year, we plan a few short learning programs, and we also offer training and consultation services. All right, given the current crisis that the foot and mouth disease epidemic has escalated to in our country, we organized this webinar to try and help to see where we can add practical advice for biosecurity measures while we are waiting for the vaccines to arrive. I think it is important to note that South Africa has never seen a foot and mouth disease outbreak of this magnitude. So it is new for all of us. And therefore, I'd like to say if there are any listeners who have experience in a specific aspect, they are more than welcome to share their contribution. So what we'll do is our speakers are going to share their inputs, and then you're welcome to, after them speaking, you can include questions in the Q&A part of the app. Just type your question and we will try to answer as many as we can, obviously those that are relevant to the theme of our webinar, which is practical biosecurity advice. On my side, being an economist, I just wanted to quickly share with you the economic impact, the issues on why. Let me just get there. So I think here we can see, this is a report that the Bureau of Food and Agricultural Policy, BFAP, published yesterday. And it shows us a summary of 2025, what happened. So there we can see that was the estimated number of outbreaks, and it went up to 24,400, and it's even escalated from there. So at the bottom here, you can see 2020, where it was and where it went. And I think obviously at this stage, it's escalated even more. This report only reflects on the dairy industry and the beef industry. It's not yet pig industry, and the small livestock is not yet included. And here you can see the impact. That is the, just in 2024, 2025, the turnover of those different commodities. So the estimation is that it can be very detrimental to the agricultural economy and the economy of our country. And then they do estimate our exports that are going to be influenced quite extensively. So that being said, let me welcome our speakers. We are joined today by Dr. Marika Badenhorst. She is a vet and a farmer, grew up on a farm, and she has more than 20 years of experience in the field. She has a animal clinic in De Wetsdorp in the Free State. Dr. Jacques van Rooyen, he is an animal scientist and ecologist. He has a PhD in veterinary science, and he's done a lot of work further north in Africa, in Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, in endemic areas. And we are privileged to have him join the university. Marika, Jacques, welcome. Thank you so much for your time and your input. I know there was a lot of behind the scenes work that went into this. Jacques, I'm going to start with you. A virus that was discovered in 1898 that is causing so much havoc. Can you just briefly tell us, so that everybody can be on the same page, where does this virus come from? How did it get here? And what are the different strains involved, and which animals are susceptible to it?
Thank you very much, Lindy. Good evening, everyone. Before I start, I just wanted to say my sincere condolences to a lot of farmers that are severely suffering as a cause of this outbreak. It's a highly emotional reality for a lot of farmers that are experiencing this firsthand on a day-to-day basis, and it's truly unfortunate. And as a farmer myself, coming from a farming family, it's our heartfelt condolences to all of you. Our prayers are with you, and we just hope and pray that we can move through this as quickly as possible, for the sake of ourselves, our country, and the future generations of our livestock industry. So I'm just going to briefly share um, a few slides that I believe is quite important, um, for just some background, because our audience, yeah, has mixed backgrounds, and we received information that not everybody is exactly on the same page. And at the same time, I also know that there's been so much information shared over the last number of months, and probably will still continue to. So for many, this would be quite well-known information, but it's important for completion nonetheless. So just a little bit of background. Foot and mouth disease is a virus that severely affects cloven-hoofed animals. And it's especially affecting cattle and pigs in our livestock species, but also sheep and goats, although their symptoms is not that severe, and especially in our SAT viruses, they don't necessarily play that important epidemiological role, but they are very important to keep an eye on nonetheless. It also occurs in cloven-hoofed wildlife, and therefore there are certain species in the South African context that are quite important, especially besides the African buffalo, that is the natural carrier for the disease in South Africa. More about that shortly. Species such as impala can be a breach species that can be severely affected and often can be seen. So for people with wildlife in the areas, species such as impala, kudu, even warthog, those are important to just be on the lookout all the time, because they could be an indicator that something is happening. There are 7 serotypes globally, across various parts of Asia, Europe, and Africa. In South Africa, Southern Africa, we primarily have the Southern African territories serotype 1, 2, and 3 viruses that circulate, and they are naturally occurring in our African buffalo, free roaming African buffalo, not our disease-free certified African buffalo. Very importantly is that it's not a zoonosis. In other words, FMD does not affect humans, and it's important that we portray that message so that it doesn't cause unnecessarily fear. It is, however, highly contagious. And in naive populations of susceptible animals, it can spread rapidly. And that is exactly what is happening currently in South Africa. And we've got first-hand experience of that. Just important to briefly touch on symptoms, and the reason why we do want to go into practical conversations and advice to farmers and professionals in the industry. But in order to do that effectively, we need to really just remind ourselves of the symptoms that we need to be on the lookout for, all of us, everybody involved, because the sooner it's detected and reported, the quicker and the faster we can address an outbreak and contain it. As with most viral infections, high fever is a clear indication. Plus, then, very, very important, and typically blister-like sores on the tongue, mouth, lips, feet, and teats of animals that causes severe pain, drooling, lameness, and reduced intake. And those are the telltale symptoms of our species, of an infection. And as a result of those sores and lameness, especially in the mouth, it really affects production in intake, and in intensive systems even more so. So it's highly severe in intensive systems like our dairy industry, our piggeries, and we will expand on that a little shortly by Marika. It's less severe in our extensive systems. In other words, there's a high morbidity, so the impact on production is quite high. All susceptible animals are affected, but the mortality rate is fairly low in adult livestock, although mortalities can be quite high in calves and lambs because of myocarditis, which unfortunately is also being experienced currently in some areas in South Africa, in the Free State, for example, also called tiger heart disease. More about that later. But animals do recover fully or partially after 2 to 3 weeks, and we will also have more detail on that shortly. In South Africa, FMD is not new to South Africa. In fact, we've been a global on the SAT viruses. We've been a global authority for many decades. Great work that has been done, research in its epidemiology, its ecology, disease ecology, and has made big contributions to global disease control, especially from a SAT virus perspective. So the reality just is that it's not known to most of South Africa. It's quite familiar in some parts of South Africa, and that is our infected zones where free-roaming African buffalo do occur, which is mainly the Greater Kruger National Park. As you can see from the diagram, those are considered infected because of the endemic presence of the disease in buffalo that occur there. And the majority of South Africa is traditionally therefore being free, declared free, and as a disease-free zone, declared by the World Animal Health Organization. And we've maintained that for decades, and primarily by following four major strategies, or a strategy that contains these actions. And one, that's geographic separation, fencing. So the western boundary of Kruger National Park is actually a disease control fence. It's not a conservation fence, still maintained by the Department of Animal Health, to separate susceptible animals from disease-carrying buffalo and wildlife. So geographic separation to avoid contact, which is your main form of transmission. Then movement control, strict movement control, especially in your buffer zone or your protection zones, those yellow areas around it. And then with that, vaccination in those areas to create an effective buffer, and on top of that, active and passive surveillance throughout the year to ensure that whenever there's any outbreak or symptoms, it can be quickly detected and detained. And for decades, this approach is really successful, and it has dealt with sporadic outbreaks. Often the rest of the country is not even aware of outbreaks that occur in some of these areas. It's contained, it's well dealt with, and the staff of the Department of Veterinary Services in those areas really do a great job at doing so. However, it has changed. And from that level of control, we're in a situation now where it's out of control. And at some point, if one of those four steps fail, or multiple ones, albeit ineffective vaccination, albeit movement control that was not complied with, and the virus do spill over into susceptible species, especially in naive populations, which is basically all our livestock in the free zone that has never been vaccinated, highly susceptible. It can truly create a significant epidemic like it has currently done so in South Africa. I think just to end off, what is important is that within the control of FMD in South Africa, it is by legislation a government-controlled disease. It's a notifiable disease to the World Organization for Animal Health. In other words, South Africa as a member state is obliged to report on and on any outbreak, and also then their control strategy is largely guided by international guidelines. So South Africa subscribed to the international standards and guidelines for FMD control, reporting, and where it relates to trade standards internationally. And as per the World Organization for Animal Health, our director of state veterinary services is the only recognized competent authority that legally is responsible or considered to officially report on incidents, control, and trade. So that is the office that they turn to say what's going on in South Africa. And therefore, if if government therefore decides to say, listen, we need public-private partnerships to roll out the vaccination, as is currently the plan, ultimately they need to keep on top of how this is rolled out, so that they can keep on reporting, so that we can actually show our progress along the progressive control pathway, which is this diagram showed, which is put forward for any country to retain or regain their free status. This is a step-by-step process, and in the 10-year plan that the minister announced and is still busy working on the details. We're all waiting for that, how such public-private partnerships can work. This was kept in consideration so as to make progress towards that freedom that we once had. And that's the regulatory framework in which this needs to happen. Thank you very much, Lenny. Back to you.
Thank you, Jock. Oh, it's quite a mouthful, but I think we know now, it's not just cut and dried. Marika, how does this virus spread?
Hello all. Thank you, Lindy, for the opportunity. So the virus spreads through direct contact of contact between animals, as well as contact with the excretions of the animals. That being said, urine, saliva, feces, milk. So that is all fluids and excretions that can contaminate the environment. It is a herd disease, which means that if there was one animal showing signs of, we consider the whole herd or the whole group being possibly infected, because there is a incubation period, and in that incubation period you cannot see which animals show signs. And coming to that, this is the very important part of the disease spreading, because many animals are moved in the window period of this illegally, and this is also part of the reason why it had started spreading so quickly. All cloven hoof animals are affected, and they can spread the disease. Also their products, such as their milk, undeboned meat. So that means meat with bone with them. And then lastly, we get to vomites. This means it is the equipment that is used on farms, such as vehicles, your clothes, your shoes. While working in kraals with infected animals, you can get the feces on your clothes and then move from one area to another, and this can then spread the disease as well.
Okay, and it's highly, highly contagious, apparently.
Yes, very contagious.
The question about, can it be transmitted through the air? I've read that in certain ideal circumstances, it can happen. What is your opinion on that?
It is possible. We have heard about it possibly happening, but it is not traditionally the case with SAT1, 2, and 3. Normally more A and O, but we have not had the chance to actually document anything for this current outbreaks. So hopefully there will be people writing articles on this current outbreak, and then we can learn much more about what happened with the SAT1, 2, and 3, why it did it, what was the weather conditions during the time it started spreading, possibly through the air, in the water, etc.
Jock, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think no, Marika's right, and there's a lot of people with incredible experience in having done remarkable experiments to try and work out the mechanism through which, especially the SAT virus, is actually spread. We do know obviously it's contact, but there's still a lot in that, especially in the transmission between buffalo and cattle, that is still not very well understood. However, typically we need to also say that this outbreak is really driven by the SAT2 viruses. So there's also SAT1 virus circulating, and we're waiting for diagnostics, which is quite overwhelmed at the moment to understand, what exactly and how far this is spread. So it's going faster than what we can actually detect, and therefore we're not always sure exactly what is circulating where. But generally, your airborne transmission has been better documented and well documented in your European countries, where the climatic conditions is much more favorable, humidity, climate, temperature, to that kind of transmission occurring in comparison to our generally dry climate. The FND virus is quite a sensitive virus to temperature, to climate, and also to pH. So that does help in our context, in the Africa, Southern African context.
Okay. Marika, can an animal sustain any permanent damage? So the animals contracted the virus and survived, and will it affect their fertility, anything like that?
So normally, because we've said it's a high morbidity, low mortality disease, generally depending on the production system, and this is very important to understand. A healthy, free roaming sheep and cattle with good condition that is well looked after will most probably have very little to almost no clinical symptoms. But in pigs, it's a totally different situation. They are very susceptible to the virus, and we have also seen the huge amount of deaths that was found in the current outbreak in the piggeries. And then we've all saw and learned about the very bad infections in the dairy cattle. So production system does play a very big role. The higher the stress and the production level of the animal, the more pathogenic the virus tends to come due to the healthy system of the animal. So therefore, we did see bad teeth lesions, very bad mouth lesions, cows' hooves sloughing off in the dairies. And the climate at that stage didn't help either. I mean, it was really muddy, and it's still muddy in a lot of places. So those animals will definitely have secondary permanent damage. And those animals are most probably better off being humanely slaughtered. But coming to a feedlot, the same situation, more of a production loss with them. They do get lesions in the mouth, which makes them feel, I mean, it's like when you have a fever, you don't feel like eating, your mouth is sore, you don't have a good intake, so growth is stunted in that area, and it's got a big economic impact on the feedlots. But on a extensive farm, they should not, most probably not have any permanent damage. What we do not know for this breeding season is the impact that the fever of the calves will have, of the fever in the cows will have on the conceptions. And also, did the fever have permanent damage in bulls that contracted the disease or not? Maybe there are some of my colleagues that have documented any changes in those parameters during the previous outbreak in the Free State and Gauteng. But this is something that we will most probably only learn in May, June, July, when we start with pregnancy testing. But this should not be a permanent problem, as fever normally just causes a loss of conception or abortion. So this should be a economic loss for this breeding season, but next season they should all conceive and be healthy again.
Okay. Next question. What do we now do while we're waiting for the vaccines? What can farmers do to try and protect their biosecurity? I know I've read in the scientific articles that farmers, that if animals did contract it and they've recovered, they are not so susceptible. You guys must please give your opinion. But what do the farmers now do that hasn't contracted it, even the ones that have contracted it? How do we protect ourselves? I think biosecurity is not something that's going to just disappear. This virus is now with us. So I think biosecurity for now and the future is very important, and practically not that easy. I know on our farm, we didn't even have a gate. We had to go and build one and, make all sorts of plans. But if you guys can just give us some practical tips on what needs to be done and how intensive it needs to be done. Marika, if you will start for us.
Thank you, Lindy. Yes, this is a very, very important question. So currently, farmers have a lot of things they do not have control over with the outbreak, such as decisions being made by government or municipalities. You also don't have control over what your neighbor does, but you have control over what you can do on your farm. So firstly, be a responsible neighbor. And with that being said, do not move your animals around. Please. Don't move them from one farm to another. Don't move them from one part of your district to another. Even if you have multiple farms in different parts of the district, this is the means of spread, and it's highly contagious, as we've said. As I've explained as well, during the incubation period, the virus spread. And you don't know which animals have been infected, and you also don't definitely know that your animals have not been infected. So don't move your animals, and definitely not from one province to another at the moment, please. This is the most important part. The second one is you are the owner of the premises, and you can decide who is allowed on your premises and who not. That being said, it is difficult to explain or to plan or give expert advice on each different production system on a platform like this. I would really urge all the farmers to speak to your local vet, your herd vet. She is the person who knows your farm just as well as you does. He knows the areas where improvements can be done. He knows your animals. We have the knowledge to help you guys to develop a decent plan, a decent biosecurity plan for your farm. So speak to them, and that's the first most important part of the biosecurity. That being said, all of us have a access control. So people have to get onto your farm, and what happens then? We want to prevent the disease from coming onto your farm. So I would suggest doing good communication with all the people that do business with you, your friends, and then ask them to make an appointment to visit your farm. You also have, if you have a multidisciplinary farming enterprise, you will have deliveries, you will have people fetching products from your farm. In cases like that, let them make an appointment so that you know when they come there. I will speak about that, the reason for that just now. At your gate, have a biosecurity checkpoint. And Jacques would now just show a very nice board that you can put up on your gate. You've all seen them. So that people become aware of why we stop them and why we do this. So then you disinfect the vehicles coming onto your farm. Also, very importantly, take a logbook of this so that you know who was on your farm when and why. And if anything happens 2-3 weeks down the line, you can help the state vet by tracing back with those data that you've gathered. We will speak about disinfection in a minute because there's some practical advice about that. People coming to your farm have a designated visitors area for vehicles to be parked. And coming back to people visiting your farm, if an agricultural representative come and visit you, have them stop at the designated area. And if you want to show them the mealies or other produce that you are producing, let them drive with you. Before that, disinfect. Disinfect shoes. Jacques will elaborate a bit more on other ways of also doing this. But the most important part is access control. Don't let other people drive around on your farm. You don't know where they were yesterday. And disinfecting does make a big difference, but it should be done correctly. So getting to disinfecting properly, there are many products currently that claims to be effective against FMD. With research, it was actually quite difficult to find a registered product that is effective against FMD. And the reason why we want a registered product and we want to use a commercial product is these products have been tested, they went through trials. And important part of disinfecting is you don't just want to disinfect for foot and mouth. One of the important things with biosecurity is you want to disinfect for other pathogens like brucellosis, leptospirosis, and other viruses and bacteria as well. I know there have been many cocktails going around of what you can use, household stuff. But importantly, stay safe, stay eco-friendly, and stay effective. This is really important. And then also remember, these products have to be normally diluted to the correct percentage. It does not help you want to save some of the product and stretch to save money, then you do not disinfect properly and you actually cause pathogens to get resistance to disinfectants. Most of these products also have a time for it to where it has to be on a surface to actually work properly. And also remember, these products work better on surfaces that is clean. So Lindy's got a nice video she shall in a few minutes where you use high pressure to actually get rid of the dirt and dung on a vehicle with disinfectant so that the product that you are using works properly and works effectively. So coming to other products, so products that I could find that is registered. This isn't the only ones. I'm sure my colleagues that's been working with the FMD virus for a while now can maybe help with more products. But Virkon S, the active ingredient, is actually registered as effective against foot and mouth. Virocon, Virex, Envirocept SC as well. Then we do know FMD is not a very hardy virus. It is very sensitive to pH, as Jacques has mentioned. So by changing the pH of the environment the virus is in, you will you will actually cause the virus to die. And this is effective, but the problems with most of these other products is they are very caustic. Household bleach, for instance, is one of these products. 3% solution is effective against foot and mouth, and some other pathogens. Caustic soda has been said to work for the virus, but on the long term, it can cause a lot of damage on your farm equipment. Another product is soda ash. It is something that you can find in the HTH pool cleaners, but it's also very caustic, and on the long run, it damages equipment. Household vinegar changes the pH of the environment, so it will inactivate the foot and mouth virus, but not necessarily other viruses. Citric acid is it's an active ingredient found in many household cleaners like Domestos and most household cleaners. It's just uneconomical to use this on a large scale. So it is effective in and around the house, but not for large farming activities. Lime soda is effective to change the pH of the environment. So it is a good practice to where your visitors come and stand with their vehicles to disinfect the area with the lime soda. So along with the proper biosecurity plan, a proper herd health plan is of very importance. If you want to have healthy animals, make sure that your animals have been vaccinated for their annual diseases like your lumpy skin, 3-day stiffness sicknesses. Those viruses are all circulating at the moment. With the virus circulating like that, the immune system is already compromised, and then foot and mouth can way easily affect these animals in those conditions. Also, if they are healthy, they are less susceptible. And if they are healthy, they all recover way quicker than with being affected. This is all being said, easier to maintain on extensive farming systems with your large pig and dairy herds. The stress levels are way more, and that does affect their health. But work with your herd veterinarian. They have the tools and they have the knowledge to help you keep your herds healthy.
Thanks, Marika. Before we get to communal farmers, Jacques, I just wanted to ask you, movement of people in and around the farm. What do you suggest? How do we regulate that, or what must be done?
Yeah, I think that well done, Marika. I think what is very important as well is a biosecurity plan exists of two components. One is you need to identify the possible pathways of infection or introduction of the virus. And then for each of those pathways, you need to have a mitigation. You need to have a strategy or a plan. So often what I've seen is farmers just start, okay, we need to disinfect. We need to, but you also need to understand, okay, for your specific property, what are the potential pathways that a virus, because that differs from one production system to another, every context, who is visiting you, where your laborers work and live, where do they go weekends, and it's actually not that difficult to sit and just think through all the potential pathways that the FMD virus can be introduced onto your property. Very, very important is securing your boundaries. often we come on farms and our boundary fences are debilitated. It's not in good order. That to me is almost the immediate starting point. You need to make sure that there's nobody else's cattle can come onto your property and your animals can't, especially in the breeding season now. A lot of bulls are with our females and they start fiddling across fences. And that is exactly what we don't. So on our farm, what we've done now is we're busy implementing where we are, on boundary fences. We put in a basic electric strand 10 meters away from, 5 to 10 meters away from our border fence. And just to keep our herd from actually making contact if there happen to be also cattle on our neighbor's farm, even if we know our neighbor, because it's not about not trusting your neighbor, it's about things happen without us seeing. And if that herd has happened to be introduced, it's subclinical for a while, and by the time you realize it, they have made contact, and it's 14 days incubation before you actually start seeing a sign, and they touched across the fence a week or two ago. So these practical things that is not that costly in a commercial farm, and you can only deploy that where you think it's necessary. But very, very important is in with your labors that they actually understand, make them part of your biosecurity team. And we've done that very, very well and successfully. And it's incredible to see how big a part of the team they become to keep the farm safe. And if they understand what their role can be, very important is as they go off the farm and onto the farm, maybe visiting friends or over weekends going home, sometimes their families live off the farm. 2 sets of clothing. So you've got on-farm clothing and that clothing stays on the farm. They need to come straight to your point of control on the farm when they come back over a weekend. They change their town clothes for their on-farm clothes, which has been washed in the meantime, should have been, and they then wear that only during the time on the farm, and the other clothes that they came back from is washed and kept away, and they don't move, especially shoes, because sometimes some farmers don't provide shoes for their laborers, and then they just wear the same set of shoes when they start visiting the livestock the next day. That is exactly what you want to avoid. I also prefer talking to your laborers and knowing where they come from, where do they visit. And if you actually have those conversations with them, you may realize that they maybe have cattle or livestock themselves on the communage in the municipality area, or they have friends that they visit. And those are things that you need to know so that you also can consider that in your potential risk profile for your property and explain that to them. So those are a few additional steps that I think can be highly effective in addition to proper disinfection protocol, which I think has already been touched. And I don't know, Lindy, if there's something you're going to share in terms of some of these, higher pressure sprays is very, very important. Just a mild little spray on a vehicle with mud and manure, that protects the virus from being in contact with a disinfectant. So you need a high pressure, and this is a really nice piece of equipment that is basic but it has got quite a high pressure. And you clean that properly and then allow for sufficient time, as Marika said, for the disinfectant to come into contact and eliminate the virus. So just a few additional things, and I do want to just mention that there is a national strategy and a plan, and there are movement protocols and regulations have been put out on conveyance of livestock and trade. All of those regulations, we're not going to go into that because it's readily available. It's been shared through farmers associations, all of that. I think the very important thing to do here is that we need unity and a concerted effort behind those regulations. Those things have been developed by incredible experts. The task teams are people with incredible experience in FMD control, technical expertise, practical expertise, veterinarians on the ground. And let's if every person starts considering the merit of what is being put out, that's where, and in their own judgment, decide whether this is good enough or not, and whether I have alternatives that I think are better. That's where we start losing this battle. The more we are concerted and unified in the effort led by the leaders, whether you even agree with them always or not, it remains our best battle strategy at the moment for this pandemic. Thank you.
Jock, so that being said, what do communal farmers do? How do they keep their herds safe? Any tips for them?
Yeah, I think that it's a more difficult reality, but I just wanted to start by saying that actually, our communal farmers in certain areas in South Africa is probably the most experienced with FMD than the majority of South Africa. In our infected zones, in our buffer zones where this has occurred, I've been involved in some of those areas with a lot of colleagues, where there's been outbreaks, where it's part of the landscape, and where those communal farmers have suffered the consequences many, many times over the years. And most of the time, people don't even, or not even aware of it. In our buffer zones, a farmer, as a rule, has receives about 50% for its animals compared to the free zone of South Africa, and they've been the buffer for decades. Those that do occur in those buffer zones. And what we've seen is how they can be unified in a crisis like this, and how they become part of the team. So, I've got a big passion for our communal farmers. If they really understand what is at stake, I think in our communities around our municipalities, this is also all new to them in the free zone. They're not familiar, and our biggest concern there is fear and misinformation, and that drives illegal movement. So that is our biggest threat at the moment. Illegal movement, either from people that's ignorant or people that really selfish for their own interests, speculants or whatever, or people that just don't know the better, or are truly fearful and just want and think it's like a death sentence, and wants to remove their cattle when there's any sign or any possible infection. That is our big risk. So I made a few points that I just wanted to briefly, in knowing, working a lot in our communal systems, maybe there's a few things that I think we can do. Briefly want to go through just for the sake of time. And just want to quickly. So in our communities, the number one thing, if you're a communal farmer, extension officer, or even a commercial farmer near or with a community in your area, our biggest risks beside illegal movement is free roaming livestock. So we do know that especially your more subsistence oriented farmers can't afford herders. Our bigger herd sizes, our bigger communal farmers often do have herders. Our herders play an incredible role in this, and we need to have a concerted effort to try and create awareness amongst them. Step number one is, let's get control over our herds and our movement within the community. So it's in everybody's interest, if you're a communal farmer, that the more there's different little herds moving around all over, not being herded without any surveillance, the bigger the risk that your animals will contain this disease or contract the disease, and the bigger risk it is also to the larger district. So let's consolidate and work together, and farmers can self-organize in these communities, and we can even facilitate, and your extension officers can facilitate under these circumstances, getting farmers together, creating the awareness that's needed so that they understand what's actually the issue, and that it's not a death sentence, and it can be controlled and managed, so that they can self-organize and have designated people for communication. And then also know the symptoms so that they can there can be surveillance. Surveillance in biosecurity is extremely, extremely important. And even in our commercial systems, there are farmers that maybe see their livestock once a week, and laborers maybe 2 or 3 times a week. So we need to increase our surveillance in our herds. The sooner you detect, the better for everyone. And in a commonage, it is possible if farmers work together and they understand. And even if there are those rebels that don't want to work together, because we have them everywhere, um, if there is a number of farm owners or livestock owners or herders that really buys into this, they can actually do surveillance on everybody. Because they move around in the same area. That's the benefit of the commonage, is that you actually can also do surveillance in those in other people's herds and kraals. Often kraals are clustered together. If you've got a few people that volunteer to check those every morning or every evening for symptoms, those are the things that you can do. And obviously then to try and keep biosecure, make sure that we don't have suspicious movement of livestock, so that we can also control our movement and that people adhere to the movement control. With that comes the promotion of identification of herds, and none of this is practical in a commonage unless the farmers themselves completely buy into this, and there are some level of support either from our commercial farmers in the area and and with our extension officers. Actually, a lot can be done, and we've seen that in neighboring countries where there's large commonages, where there's been outbreaks, and we've been successful in containing outbreaks within commonages because farmers were actually working together. Herders were trained in symptoms. Herders knew how to avoid contact with suspicious animals or of an unknown status. Those herders can play an incredible role in this if they are, well equipped. And I think there's training and there's awareness campaigns that like the university can help with in order to create that kind of awareness. But it's very important that our commercial farmers also reach out to our commonages. I don't think there needs to be animosity now. There needs to be unity at a landscape level, at a district level, and it's in everybody's interest. The more we reach out to our commonages and help them to be more biosecure, the lower the risk even for our own enterprises. So it's a great opportunity to reach out, and there are ways to do that. And very important, have a point of contact within our commonages. A lot of our farmers associations or commercial farmers don't necessarily have any contact with our commonages. And if there is a line of communication that can be established to have regular communication, check one another, create awareness in that way, and to report, it can truly help, especially in getting illegal movement, getting control over illegal movement. If there's trust, we can help one another report suspicious movement, which is our big threat. And I think those are basic steps that can be taken, because we don't have one point of entry. So footpaths and decontamination becomes very difficult. Yes, there are ways, but state vet services can help in that. I think this is a general effort that can be done in especially our municipal commonages. In our larger communal areas, farmers need to take the leadership now and get farmers around them and let other organizations help them to be equipped in order to address the reality in the area. It's got to come from the farmers themselves and the leadership.
Thank you, Jock. Yeah, and as I mentioned, we can get involved with training if there's an immediate need, because of your experience in Botswana, Namibia, and Zimbabwe, that we can help communities to know what to do and what to look for, etc. Marika, what must the farmer do? He's seen the symptoms, and he has to now, what must he do? Must he bring the animal to the kraal? Must he leave it where it is? What do we do?
Okay, yeah, that is a daunting question, because no one of us wants to see a salivating animal limping around. But once you see one, please bring that animal into the kraal and have a look at its mouth, and then report firstly to your private veterinarian. We will then help you to report that to the state veterinarians. The reason being is the state veterinarians are the ones that control the disease, but all of the farmers don't always have the contact or the direct line to the state veterinarians, and that cause unnecessary stress to the farmer. I can vouch for the fact that all of our private veterinarians have very good contact and work relationships with our state veterinarian colleagues. And once you have seen that, I know you do skip a couple of heartbeats. And what now? So what you do next is you keep that animal in the kraal. We notify the state vet. They send out state veterinary services and they take the samples to confirm or not confirm. Well, they take the samples and that will then confirm the disease or confirm that it is not foot and mouth. We take samples from the lesions in the mouth as well as blood. From the samples of the lesions, we can determine which strain we are working with. Unfortunately, as Jacques mentioned, that specific lab is overwhelmed with the number of samples, and it does take a bit longer than the serological test that we do. So we send the serological tests in, and we find results within 3 to 5 days, depending on the load at the lab. Because it's a state controlled disease, there is only one lab in South Africa that can currently test for the disease, and that is Onderstepoort's lab. So the state vet sends off the samples and we get the results back. But in the meantime, that animal is still in the kraal, and please keep that animal separated from the rest of the herd with food and water in the kraal. So that means you actually put that animal in quarantine. Also, please limit access to that animal. That will prevent the spread onto the rest of the farm. The specific group that this animal or animals were in is now also suspect. They were in contact, they don't show the symptoms, but we don't know if they have contracted the disease, as we have explained before. For that reason, you also want to limit the access to that specific group. That being said, you still have a lot of other animals on the farm that needs to be inspected. Please bear in mind then, work with PPE clothes. That means overall and boots that you use only at the kraal with the animals that he is now highly suspect, and go out to the farm while inspecting the other animals with clean clothes, with a clean vehicle. It's really important to now really put high biosecurity measures in place for you to actually prevent spreading the disease to the whole herd. So, okay, once the disease has been confirmed, state veterinary services then put the farm under quarantine, which means you are not by law, you are not allowed to move any live animals from your farm. The only animals that you are allowed to move off your farm are animals that is carrying a Red Cross permit in a sealed vehicle that is on their way to an abattoir. And these abattoirs where these animals can be slaughtered are registered abattoirs that can handle the 5th quarter of the animal. So you are allowed by law to slaughter these animals under a Red Cross permit. So you have to speak to your state veterinarian. They will then help you getting that, but you are not allowed to sell any live animals to anyone. This is really important because this is where the illegal movement comes in, and this is where the disease is spreading. So do not move animals from a farm that now is under quarantine to another farm a couple of kilometers down the road so that you can actually sell animals from that farm. This spreads the disease. It's really important. Okay, so when the animals are now under quarantine, the state veterinarians, they vaccinate the herd when the vaccine is available, and this is one of the very important tools to prevent the disease from spreading, because we get a herd immunity in that group, and once the herd is immune against the virus cannot go onto another animal in the herd, and it basically dies off in that specific herd. After the vaccination has been done on that specific farm, a radius of 5 to 10 kilometers of quarantine is also implemented on the neighboring farms. Those farms are also not allowed to sell any live animals except for slaughter, and they are also not allowed to move any animals. This is really important because the state veterinarians does surveillance on those farms to see in which direction and what is the spread on the neighboring farms. The quarantine farm, or the farm of origin, or the farm that is infected at that moment, is then visited by the state veterinarian, depending on that depends on area to area and the workload and the people available, because they come and test. I think they come and test about 3 to 4 months later to see if there is still animals that show disease, and if the vaccine, to just monitor the whole herd. The state veterinarians then at some stage, once there were 2 negative test results, decide when they lift the quarantine. It can take up to a year to 18 months, depending on the situation in the area. Once it spreads, the area stays in quarantine for longer. So this is also why it's important not to move animals around. The more you move animals around, the more it spreads, the longer the whole area stays under quarantine, and that has got an economic effect on all the animals and the whole community then. As I said, I just want to check my notes if there was anything else that I wanted to mention.
Erika, I just want to, while you're checking your notes, if now the animal is tested positive and it is in, you've separated it and everything, can we inject anything to help it? Is there anything that we can do, supplements or so, to help this animal?
That coming back to the production system on your farm, that will basically determine what you will do. If the animal is really, if there's bad lesions in the mouth and it's really struggling to eat, giving it some anti-inflammatories will definitely break the fever and make the animal, or make the mouth less painful, and that will help them to recover quicker. Healthy animals normally recovers quick by themselves, but yes, painkillers is definitely a good choice of drug. Antibiotics will not kill the virus because antibiotics are intended to be used for bacterial infections. So it isn't good practice to just use blanket antibiotic treatment just because there are wounds, except if there is pus and if the wounds really get bad, secondary bacterial infections then warrant antibiotics. Products like basic vitamins. You have a supplement, vitamin E and selenium, and you've got Chirob and Chirophos. Those products are all available, and it improves the well-being of the animal affected. But please do not bring your whole herd into the crush and now treat them with a blanket treatment of whatever has been circulated to promulgate um, the recovery of the virus, because you pose a biosecurity risk to the rest of your herd. So please rather just leave all your healthy animals in the veld, and keep them, yeah, happy and sound grazing in the veld. But this, as I said, it sounds way easier and practical in an extensive system. It is more difficult, and the way you handle this in a more intensive system is different. So please speak to your veterinarian, especially dairy farmers, piggeries, on how you will now handle them, because they will definitely show symptoms way worse than extensive animals.
Guys, for the sake of time, I want to go to some of the questions. Let me just see. Let me see. So there's a question here of the communal cattle that contracted foot and mouth, and they recovered quite well. The question is our community now free of foot and mouth, and how long does it stay in the herd, and can we have another outbreak? Who's going to answer that?
I'll take that one. Okay, so the it's a state-controlled disease. So after an animal or a herd contracts the disease, as I've explained, the state veterinarians take control over what's happening in the herd. They do monitoring, as I've explained. So they take blood and then monitor to see if they still test negative. Once they don't sample the whole herd, there's normally a percentage of animals that will be sampled. And if those animals, and they are able to identify those animals, and they test them every time. So if those animals stay negative, then that basically means that that specific herd is negative. But what happens after that is not for a private veterinarian to say. Can you have another outbreak? Yes, unfortunately, it is possible. It has been documented, and we know of farms that have contracted the outbreak more than once. So they do find that it happens, and the best immunity that does happen is the natural immunity. But unfortunately, the way that foot and mouth works is it does not elicit a long-term immune response. And that is part of, I don't want to go into the vaccines in detail. I think there's people out there that can answer the vaccine questions way better than me. But there is a reason why we are looking at other vaccines as well. Just for instance, the BVI vaccine that we are currently using only gives a 3 months coverage of the virus. The ones that we are currently looking at they have done well. It gives at least a 6 months coverage, but that means with a booster. So you have to vaccinate them once, 4 weeks later, and then every 6 months. So that is the reason why it's possible to actually have another outbreak. The coverage of the vaccine and contracting the disease doesn't give the animals a lifelong resistance against the virus.
Thank you, Marika. I'm just going through the questions. So we're sticking to answering questions related to practical technical advice. We can't answer anything about when vaccines are coming. We don't have that information. So there's a question that says, since foot and mouth disease is not zoonotic, is it allowed for the meat to be consumed, or what are the risks in terms of the disease transmission or spread? Jacques, I'm going to ask you to answer that for us.
Yeah, the first question is whether that meat comes from an animal that has been infected or not, and whether it comes from an area with a high risk. Because as we explained, there's an incubation period. So even if it's from an area with a high risk, but it hasn't shown signs, that virus could be in that animal at the time of slaughter, and therefore one needs to take all necessary precautionary measures. Cooked meat is safe for human consumption. Um, and because the virus is temperature sensitive. However, there are a lot of parts of that animal that can potentially harbor a lot of virus. Like the head with its lymph nodes and with its trachea going into the lungs is potentially full of virus, and that virus can be harbored in the trachea of an animal for weeks, even not months. So there's a lot of precautions. So I'm very hesitant to say no, it's safe. Use the meat, because what then happens is it can very easily be moved around, and I think we need to be very careful of that if we start to slaughter animals, that especially if you see the animal has lesions. Number one, you have to report it. I think it's very important to, even if you're going to slaughter it and eat it yourself, first report it, because by that time that you've seen that there's animals around you that may already have contracted the virus, you just haven't seen it yet. And it's because it's a notifiable disease, state controlled, you are legally obliged to report. And I think it's very important. You are legally obliged to report. We do hear more and more of people saying they're not going to report out of fear for for quarantine and all of that. Well, what actually then happens is there's other consequences to that. In fact, areas that should be prioritized for vaccination won't, because there's no reporting, and ultimately, all the herd will be reported anyway. So the sooner it's reported, the sooner it can be dealt with, the sooner your day zero comes, the sooner you have the opportunity to start trade freely again. Although there's going to be a tough period until that happens, but the sooner that happens, the sooner you can move on again. So even if you're going to home consume your animal, if you're a communal farmer, for example, and you see first report, and then it's even possible and maybe even preferable that the state vet will say, well, if you wanted to eat this animal, eat it right now, cook it, because that actually then control the disease right there and then. And there's less, an animal that can't spread the disease, because the longer it's alive, the more it can shed virus. So to me, very important. There's certain meat parts that we know, if handled correctly, cannot spread the disease, but that has to go through a specific process of measurement and specific deboning, deglanding, curing, and so that the pH actually drops in that meat. And there's actually regulations for that, which is part of non-geographic disease control, which is going to become a very important reality in South Africa. And I think part of the conversation that really needs to start urgently, because there are standards for us to trade and keep on trade, even export, within the outbreak situation, or at least within or post-outbreak rather, and with vaccination, that there are alternative trade measures that has just never been necessary in South Africa because we've been free. But actually, our neighboring countries are already deploying these very successfully and are trading even out of the infected zones, even internationally. And we've been involved in developing those standards. It's there. WUA has endorsed it. So there are these alternatives that we need to start discussing as well within South Africa's red meat industry, but perhaps for a next time.
Yes, I think because vaccination is obviously not the end of the process. It's sort of the beginning. We now need to be able to trade, which is the most important part for the economy and for the farmers. But yes, I'd love to go into that policies and see what it's about, and so we can get it out there so that our legislation can adapt. There was an important question here about a river that flows through my farm. Should I fence off the river? Is it a high risk? It makes it difficult to then provide water to all my camps. Can I pump water to the river and then sterilize the water? Like I said, we don't know everything, guys. Do you know what do we say?
Yeah, Marika, you can come in too, but I think these things become very difficult because it becomes very circumspecific. Circumstance specific, context specific.
Jacques, your Wi-Fi is
We know
acting
why
up.
virus can. So
Your Wi-Fi is acting up a bit. Marie, are you there, Jacques? Can you continue?
yeah, sorry, there was a blip.
There we go.
So, in a free in a big river system, the chances of something like that is very slim, especially in the South African context. It's very difficult to say no, it's not possible. That's exactly the difficult part here is it's highly unlikely, most likely, in that context. If you say a river. A river can take a lot of shapes and forms. It depends a lot on whether there's active shedding of virus upstream of an infected animal or not, and significant amounts of other conditions that actually then determine the actual risk of that being contracted through water. As a rule, we know water can, but it's not that I'm aware of that it's actually been spread through such free flowing big river systems. In our context, it's just better to be safe regardless. But we also are an extensive livestock system, so we also have to remain practical in this. If we start fencing off rivers and avoiding and cooking boiling water for our livestock, that's not practical. It won't work. It's not implementable. So we need to stay realistic in what we expect. I would dare to say that kind of extensive conditions for the virus spreading is very, very unlikely. If from a neighboring farm, for example, unless it's a dense herd drinking together and one of the animals are salivating, then that risk becomes higher of spreading it.
Okay,
I
thank
don't
you.
know. Okay.
Tony, and there was a question here, Tony. I hope we answered you about if people need to visit your field visits. Like we mentioned, protocol, they need to be, well, not they need to be sterilized, but the vehicles need to be sterilized. And remember, something that we spoke about earlier this week, don't forget about the inside rubber mat in the vehicles, because that's where the shoes have been, and people must just please, go through. Their shoes also need the underside of their shoes, because that's the type of virus that we're dealing with. It's just highly contagious. So the protocol now is just go overboard, and rather try everything that you can than be sorry at a later stage. There was a question on what nutrition to give an infected animal. Marika, what would you say?
I've quickly read that one question, and I think it also depends on the farming system that they are in. If it's an extensive farming system, the nutrition that is currently available in the veld is sufficient for what they need. You can give them some extra production leak. It doesn't need to be expensive if you want to supplement some of the food. There's been a bit of a dry spell now, so after the good rains in December and now the hot weather, the veld did lose a bit of quality. You can add a production leak, or what we call a oorgangslek, which contains a bit of urea, and that will just help it'll definitely supply enough of what you need for the cow. But that depends on the system. If it's a dairy, then you have to decide on if you have a dairy system where you're on a TMR or on on pastures, and that's a whole different system. So it is difficult to give good advice on the exact question, but I would say if you are a extensive farmer or you are communal farmer at the moment, just make sure that if it's an infected animal, you will unfortunately have to quarantine it, and then you will have to provide food. It will be difficult in a communal area to take it out alone, to feed on its own, because you would want to keep it separate. But the felt in itself is sufficient for what you need.
Thanks, Marika. Abram, a nice question there. From a research side, I'm also interested concerning the Free State spread of foot and mouth disease. Is there data available on the relative prevalent modes of transmission, i.e. animal transport versus direct animal to animal versus vehicles? I can just think there is not. It's because we've never had this. But yes, please, we would like to have it. So the thing is just that people don't know unless they've really, because there's an incubation period. The data is not, it's not that easy to get the data, but I think working with our vets, state vets, and trying to get the information just so that we can benefit from it in the future and say, look, this was the most probable way of infection. The research tells us it is direct contact is your first line, but we don't know in the Free State, actually in the country, was it direct contact or transport or whatever. I know with transporting from infected areas to in areas that were not infected, that is how it's spread throughout the country. But yes, I think that type of data would be very valuable. Okay, then they ask, I'm not going to answer the question on time because we don't know how long these things take. Then we have a question here. Do we know when animals are most infectious and can spread the disease? And do we know how long the virulence lasts? And do we know when virulence stops or comes to an end?
Jock, I'm gonna throw you under the bus.
Jock, what is your opinion?
I'm not a virologist, and there's very good science and data on these things, but generally there's a period of virus shedding. And Marika can come in that it is well documented when the animal is salivating, when the animal has the vesicle fluid, so it's got its ulcers, it's got its sores. During that time, it's actually shedding significant amounts of virus until the body is able to respond sufficiently to contain the virus, and then it starts shedding less and less until it actually stops shedding at some point, and the animal is on a recovery. So the exact time frame for that to happen, it's the period of intense viremia. It's probably around a week or so until it's over, and it starts to diminish from there. There is actually good data on some of that, and it depends on various factors. So one is able to share more specific information on that that has been documented specifically for FMD in general. And a lot of the regulations and the protocols followed is based on exactly those kind of scientific evidence in as far as how long containment should say, how long an animal should be in quarantine, and how long before you can start considering whether there's any virus circulating anymore or not. So yeah, I hope that at least gives you a little bit of information. It can also start shedding virus even before it shows symptoms. So that is very, very important. And depends also on the excretion type. So an animal in the trachea it can harbor the virus for significant amount of time, but it can't necessarily transmit during that time, but it can still be there, and that's why it's important for slaughtering also to keep in mind. But that during that incubation period, an animal can already shed virus, although it's not even yet in its peak viremia stage. And that is also quite very important and a risk. And that's typically how it spreads so quickly. By the time you see symptoms, it has already spread in the subclinical period.
Thanks, Jock. Another practical question. What is more effective, foot or a bath for disinfectant or a high pressure spray?
It'll probably also, yeah, it'll definitely depend on what you want to disinfect. When you want to disinfect a vehicle, a spray rays that they use in piggeries and with the chicken production systems have been shown to be the best way of disinfecting those vehicles. But then the vehicle has to be clean. If you want to disinfect your shoes, the bath or a spray, as long as the downside of the shoes is clean. You don't want to have dirt or manure or anything on the shoe when you disinfect. Then it doesn't matter if you spray it or you go through a bath. I mean, the contact time and the amount of contact that you put onto disinfectant that you put onto the surface that you are disinfecting, you will get to the same place with spraying. So yeah, it depends on what you want to disinfect.
Yes. Another good question. How far, where do I find it now? On a dairy farm, how far away from the herd must the infected animal be kept? Practical. What would you say?
As far as possible. Sorry, it's a difficult one because that's where the practical part comes in. It all depends on what your whole farm setup is like. Ideally, all farms should have a quarantine area. And this is something that we have neglected for very long. All animals that is bought in, irrespective of what the test that has been done on them, they should stay in quarantine for at least 28 days. 28 days because most viruses and bacteria shows clinical symptoms within 28 days. If you are unsure about 28 days, take it to 30 days or 34 days. But the reason why you don't want to keep it too long is you have to feed them once while they are in quarantine or have a quarantine camp at least. So, and that quarantine camp should actually be double fenced and there should be access control to that area. If you have that on your farm, electrical fencing, double fenced, as long as nothing else can get access to that direct contact to that area, it doesn't matter how far exactly it is from the rest of the animals. The important part is they should be out of direct contact of your animals with their own water source, with their own people looking after them, with their own feeding area. And if you have to feed from your big source, one person should be responsible for driving in there and out. And it should be the sole responsibility of one person.
Thank you, Marika. Bester, I'm going to try and, because otherwise we'll carry on the rest of the night, but I'm going to try and do two more questions. Bester, you talk about lorries that's loading maize for Zim. I'm going to answer this one. Even if the chances are not good that truck might be carrying a virus, my advice will be it has to be sprayed off. Don't let any vehicles in there. Rather disinfect, and like you saw, you can have a mobile. Those little spray guns are 800 Rand, I think. Rather be safe. Like we said, just rather go overboard now. Then what else? Oh yeah, so I see here we are going to record. This is being recorded, and we are going to share it. for staff and other people, yeah, we can start, we can also share videos. Let me see what else is there. If I bring a suspicious animal into my main area where I work with my animals and that animal proves to be positive, it becomes, every time I try to read something, it becomes problematic to bring in other animals that I need to attend to that might not be suspicious. Should I keep all animals that entered the working area separate, and if so, for how long? So I think the question has actually been answered. We said a quarantine area. Even now, just put a temporary kraal up where you treat your suspected animals. If they test positive, or even if you suspect them and you can see symptoms, rather keep them in a quarantine camp far away for at least 30 days, 28 days, I think Marika said. Anything that you guys would like to add to that?
Yes, I'd just like to add, with the quarantines camps that I was just explaining about earlier, it is important that there should be handling facilities. It should not be a camp in its own. So you have a whole, and it doesn't have to be expensive and fancy. Um, just having a neck clamp and at least being able to handle one cow in that area is more than sufficient. And then acquiring some of these movable neck clamps and systems is sufficient. But you don't want to, for the long term, you don't want to use movable camps. But for now, the movable camps alone will be sufficient. But putting in a quarantine area on your farm, have a neck clamp, be able to handle one animal in a proper and easy way. You don't want to get kicked and not looking forward to work those animals because your facilities are bad. But you don't need to put up the most fancy system there. It is just to be practical. So yes, you don't want to use your main handling facilities for any susceptible animal.
Another practical question, if we've now sprayed our tires, how long do we need to wait? Is there a certain amount of time that needs to pass before we can move on?
Most disinfectants take 10 to 20 minutes to work properly.
Okay.
And that is the difficult part about disinfecting. That is also the reason why you want to disinfect that vehicle when it enters your farm, or actually before it enters your farm. Ideally, you want to do that in town when they leave town, but it's not practical. So in order to be practical, you want to have it as far away as possible from where your animals are and from where the homestead is. And then if you are worried, the most tar roads and gravel roads with the heat wave that happened is really hot. It's highly unlikely that the virus will actually survive that heat and the conditions that they will enter once they're on the ground or on the tar. But when those vehicles that might have dung or mud or anything on them comes onto your farm and it stands for a while, and that's the reason why I said have a visitors parking area. Treat that area with lime. If you put lime there, you've disinfected the vehicle, you let it stand there, the pH on the ground changes. So it's a double way of actually disinfecting and covering your area. And you can do that at loading areas where your dairy truck has to, where the dairy truck has to stand, or where the feeding truck has to stand. It just covers it. It covers you both ways.
Thank you, Marika. Alison, I see you say, I must please advise how to survive financially after it's been found on your farm. I'm with you. These are the things that we're all grappling with. But I do think, and I want to appeal to agribusinesses and banks to stand in solidarity with our farmers now. This is not something that they could have planned for. It is a natural disaster, and we need our agribusinesses and financial institutions to understand the situation and assist our farmers. Refinance, whatever it takes. Every situation is unique. Then the last question. I'm sorry, guys, we're going to sit here till midnight if we answer all the questions. We did say, well, we don't know yet if the vaccine has any influence on the fertility, but it hasn't been found to have, else in other places in the world where it's been used. There was another one that let me just see. Oh, yeah. Can flies spread the virus? Do we know? I don't think we know.
No, I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of the vectors that is difficult to, from what I know, that it hasn't been in our conditions haven't been proven. It's difficult. I mean, there's lots of oxpeckers, and in certain areas where they occur, there's lots of things that we know potential. In fact, in some of those instances, there's even research being planned and being carried out to just better try and understand all the potential modes and vectors. We know in some diseases that is well described. It's very difficult to say no, but I think there are conditions always, like with all these things, if it's a high density of fly infestation, in an environment where there's like a dairy, where there's high levels of virus being shed. It's difficult to say it's unlikely or impossible. At the end of the day, each of these potential pathways of transmission needs to be considered in merit within the context of it is, and that's why your relationship with your private vet and your state vet that understands your context and your condition is absolutely essential. And I really want to just make sure that people, reach out to them if you've got questions. You'd reach out to them if you're uncertain of modes of transmission. Rather ask and make sure and see what mitigation you can do. Not all mitigation has to be, cost money and be expensive. It's often very practical and might be just something that you've never thought of. That your health professional can just at least advise you. Your veterinarian, your herd health veterinarian can just give you practical tips, knowing your conditions. So to me, that is important. But it's very difficult to say yes or no on flies specifically, in as far as my knowledge goes.
I think to all our producers, please understand that we are standing in solidarity. We don't have all the answers, but we are committed that if we gain any new knowledge, we will be the first ones to share it. I really hope and pray that this vaccines now arrive and that we can start with our vaccination program. On our side, like I said, we will discuss, hopefully in our next webinar. We plan to do one monthly. Every month is on the trade issues and how do we go forward. Other countries are, we'll probably get divided into zones and we'll be allowed to do certain things according to zone. I would also just like to say the legislation and the protocols were developed according to European standards, and it's not necessarily very practical for us. And so we are also in contact, with the World Animal Health Organization to try and see. But I mean, these are not solutions that are coming this week. We're just saying that we are really, as a group, trying to see what we can do to assist and to help us as a country to be able to fight this virus. With that, Marika and Jacques, you guys have been stars. They've within a week, they've said, no, that's no problem. They'll join in. They've done it at no cost. Thank you, guys. I hope everybody that's been listening did learn something. And like I said, you are welcome to get into contact with us so that we can try and see if there's any other questions or help or assistance from a knowledge side or information side or a training side that we can assist you with. Please contact us. And with that, I'm going to say good night until our next webinar.
you. Bye, everyone.
In the heart of central South Africa stands a university focused on possibility, progress, and purpose. A place where knowledge evolves, ideas grow, and futures take shape. This is the University of the Free State. For 121 years, the UFS has advanced learning across 3 distinctive campuses, bringing together students from diverse backgrounds to form one connected, future-focused academic community. We are an innovative, research-led, student-centered, and regionally engaged university. Guided by our vision of responsible societal futures, we use our knowledge and partnerships to support progress and impact across our region, continent, and world. Across 7 faculties, our programs are shaped by expert academics committed to real-world relevance and meaningful impact. We train educators, health professionals, legal thinkers, creatives, scientists, business leaders, and theologians who drive change in their fields. Students learn from leading researchers and emerging scholars, working within networks that stretch across Africa and beyond. They step into a university that collaborates with global partners while remaining grounded in its responsibility to society. Our values shape how we teach, work, and engage. Excellence, care, accountability, impact, social justice, sustainability. These principles guide our commitment to student success, ensure a supportive and safe learning environment, and inspire a culture that embraces growth and forward-looking thinking. From advanced research facilities to community partnerships, from blended learning innovation to campus sustainability, the UFS continually evolves to meet the needs of a changing world. The UFS cultivates graduates and knowledge that create impact locally and globally. We are a forward-looking institution where fresh ideas grow, where diverse perspectives spark new insight, and where tomorrow's leaders are prepared today. Globally connected, regionally engaged, purpose-driven toward responsible societal futures. This is the University of the Free State.